The Billionaire. Who stopped, and the 4 words that rewrote a destiny stop. Imagine this. A $5 billion tech CEO in a designer suit is speeding toward the most important meeting of his career, when a single look from a little girl crying on a doorstep makes him hit the brakes. Why? Because the 4 simple words she spoke didn't just stop his luxury sedan. They stopped his whole broken life. This is the story of an impossible connection, a returning shadow from the past, and a choice that proved blood isn't the only thing that makes a family. Before we dive into this incredible tale of healing and second chances, I want to invite you to be a part of this community. If you love stories that remind you what truly matters, please consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us grow together. And if you enjoy this video, please give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Are you ready to discover how 4 words can truly rewrite the lives of 2 broken souls? Let's get started. Subscribe to the channel now. 1. The intersection of fate. The man and the little blue dress. It was just a small girl in a sky blue dress, weeping on the steps of a small dance studio. He was a billionaire in a bespoke suit who nearly drove past her, until 4 words changed both their lives forever. It was a drizzly Thursday afternoon in early autumn in San Francisco, California. Elias Vance, the name known globally in the tech sector, found himself navigating a quiet residential street in the Richmond district. He wasn't supposed to be there. His chauffeur, Michael, had taken a wrong turn, and instead of heading directly to his skyscraper office for another investor meeting, Elias had asked to be dropped off a few blocks early. He said he needed air. The truth was, he needed silence, the kind of silence that asks no questions and expects no answers. He walked with his hands deep in the pockets of his light gray tailored suit. His expensive leather shoes made barely a sound on the damp pavement. Elias looked every bit the man the world believed him to be. Confident, polished, untouchable. But inside, he was a hollow shell. His wife, Anya, had died just 8 months prior after a brutal, swift fight with a rare cancer. Since then, Elias had mastered the art of functioning without living. He packed his calendar with launches, acquisitions, and division mergers, and smiled for all the right cameras. But his penthouse was silent, and his heart was even quieter. He walked past a modest dance studio, wedged between a dry cleaner and a small family-owned grocery store. It wasn't the kind of place he'd normally notice. There were no grand windows or sleek branding, just a simple chalkboard sign outside that read, "Father-daughter dance tonight, 5:00 p.m. He barely registered it until he saw her. She was sitting alone on the steps out front, her small hands clasped in her lap. Her blonde hair was pulled into a neat bun with a bright blue ribbon, and she wore a delicate light blue dress that seemed to shimmer faintly in the dimming light. Her white ballet flats were scuffed, and her posture was too still for a child her age. Elias slowed down instinctively. There was something about her, the way her eyes were fixed on the pavement, as if it had personally let her down. That made him pause. He hesitated, unsure if approaching her would frighten her or cause trouble. But as he drew a little closer, she looked up. Her eyes were the color of the Pacific just before a storm. Blue, clear, but heavy with unshed emotion. She didn't flinch. She didn't ask who he was. Instead, in a voice so quiet he almost missed it, she said, "It's the daddy dance, and I don't have one." Her words hit him like a physical blow to the chest. There was no drama in her tone, just a simple, crushing truth. And somehow, that made it even harder to bear. Elias slowly crouched down, bringing himself to her level. His knees cracked, reminding him he wasn't young anymore. But in that moment, something inside him, the part that had been numb for months, shifted. He looked into her eyes, and without even thinking, he said, "Then I will be your daddy for the dance." There was no dramatic music, no crowd watching, just a little girl with a broken hope and a man with a broken heart, meeting on an ordinary sidewalk, changing both their lives without either of them realizing it. 2. The gathering storm. A past threat returns, Serafina. Sarah Hayes was wrapping up her 10th consecutive night shift at the downtown city hospital when her phone vibrated with a message from her neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. It simply read, "Little Ellie had a blast at the dance. She'll tell you all about it. Also, you might want to ask her about the man in the gray suit." The message puzzled her, but there was no time to reply. She was always ready late picking up her daughter. Her body ached in ways she had stopped trying to describe. The hospital floor had been a chaos of codes, alarms, crying patients, and irritable doctors all night. She was used to operating under constant pressure, but some days, the toll hit harder than others. Today was one of those days. The weight of exhaustion settled onto her shoulders as she drove home in her beat-up old Honda Civic. The back seat was still cluttered with old toys and work scrubs she hadn't washed in a week. Ellie was waiting for her in Mrs. Rodriguez's living room, curled up on the sofa with a juice box in one hand and a plastic tiara in the other. She looked radiant, glowing in a way Sarah hadn't seen in what felt like forever. Her little blue dress had glitter dusted on the skirt, and her cheeks were still slightly flushed from exertion. Sarah knelt down, brushing a lock of hair from her daughter's forehead, and asked softly, "Did you have fun, sweetie?" Ellie nodded furiously and started talking at once, the words tumbling over each other like an overflowing tap. "It was amazing. There were lights and music and cookies and lemonade, and we all got to twirl and spin, and Mommy, he chose me." Sarah blinked. "Who chose you?" Ellie beamed. "The man in the suit. The gray one. He saw me sitting alone, and I told him I didn't have a daddy to dance with, and then he said he'd be mine, just for the dance." Sarah froze for a second. A strange, cold tightness bloomed in her chest. Her first instinct was panic. Who was this man? Why had a total stranger danced with her daughter? Why hadn't anyone called her? Her mind jumped to headlines and horror stories, but then she looked again at Ellie's face. There was no fear in her daughter's eyes, only wonder. The kind of pure wonder Sarah hadn't seen in her for so long, not since everything changed. After thanking Mrs. Rodriguez, Sarah drove Ellie home, listening intently to every detail. Ellie recounted the story like a fairy tale. The man had brown hair and the kindest blue eyes, she said. He helped her tie her ribbon when it came undone and taught her how to spin without falling. He didn't talk down to her or make her feel like she was just a little kid. He called her Miss Ellie and even gave her a rose from the refreshment table. Sarah tucked Ellie into bed that night with her heart stuck between two emotions, relief and unease. Relief because, for the first time in months, her daughter had felt seen and special. Unease because she didn't know who this man was or what he wanted. She lay awake later, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the apartment. She hadn't expected to raise a child alone. Ellie's biological father, Dean, had left 3 years ago, shortly after Ellie's 3rd birthday, without warning or explanation. One morning, he kissed Sarah on the cheek, packed a suitcase, and simply never came back. The mortgage, the bills, the daycare fees, everything had fallen onto Sarah's shoulders, and she had carried it ever since, silently, determined never to show her daughter how hard things had become. The next morning, while Ellie was eating cereal, she showed Sarah a picture on Mrs. Rodriguez's phone. The man in the gray suit was kneeling beside her, holding her hand, both of them in the middle of a laugh. The image hit Sarah in the gut, not just because he was handsome, which he was, but because he looked like he genuinely cared. There was something gentle in the way he looked at Ellie, something unforced. He hadn't posed for the camera. He hadn't faked a smile. He was simply present. Sarah couldn't remember the last time anyone had looked at her daughter that way. Still, she couldn't let her guard down. She asked the neighbor for his name. "Elias Vance," Mrs. Rodriguez replied, as if it should mean something. Sarah's eyebrows furrowed. The name sounded familiar. Later that day, during her lunch break at the hospital, she searched for him on Google. What she found made her sit bolt upright. Elias Vance was the CEO of one of the most powerful tech companies in North America, Vance Innovations. Forbes called him one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country. He had given keynote speeches at Silicon Valley conferences and appeared on magazine covers. But his most recent photo was different. It was taken at his wife's funeral. The caption read, "Tech Titan bids farewell to beloved wife after cancer battle." In the photo, he looked 10 years older, empty, worn down. Sarah stared at the screen for a long time. The man who had knelt beside her daughter wasn't just a stranger. He was someone the world saw as untouchable, larger than life. And yet, he had seen Ellie sitting alone on the steps of a dance studio. And instead of walking past like everyone else, he had stopped. That night, when Ellie asked if she would see Mr. Elias again, Sarah didn't have an answer. But something deep inside her shifted. For the first time in years, she wondered not just if she could survive, but if she could ever hope for something more. Interaction. Has a small act of kindness from a stranger ever completely shifted your perspective? Share your experience. Comment, and give us a thumbs up. 3. The unspoken bond and the legal threat. Elias Vance had never felt more unsure of himself than he did standing in front of the modest townhouse on Maple Street, holding a bouquet of simple white daisies. It wasn't the kind of place he frequented. He was used to penthouse boardrooms, polished marble lobbies, and fine dining establishments with valet parking. But here, in this quiet neighborhood, he felt more out of place than ever. Yet, he stayed. He had called Mrs. Rodriguez from the dance studio, explaining who he was, and asked her to pass his number to Ellie's mother. He wasn't even sure what he had been hoping for. A clumsy thank you, perhaps, or a polite brush-off. Instead, 3 days later, he received a text message from an unrecognized number. It was short and cautious. "Ellie would like to thank you in person, Saturday afternoon, 3 p.m. He hadn't expected a reply, much less an invitation. And now, standing here with his heart thumping like a teenager's, he felt foolish for worrying so much. He knocked twice, not too loud, and after a moment, the door opened to reveal the little girl who had changed everything. Ellie smiled the moment she saw him. "You came," she said, throwing her arms around his waist before he had time to react. She wore a soft yellow t-shirt with a unicorn on it, her hair down and slightly messy, and she looked up at him with complete trust. Behind her stood her mother, Sarah Hayes. She was not what he had expected. She looked tired, but not weak. Her face showed the quiet strength of someone who had seen too much and kept moving anyway. Her hair was pulled back in a loose braid, and her eyes, calm but weary, met his with cautious curiosity. She wore simple jeans and a sweatshirt, and somehow was still striking in a way that had nothing to do with fashion or polish. She didn't smile right away, and Elias didn't blame her. He was a stranger who had shown up out of nowhere and danced with her daughter. Her caution made sense. "Hello," he said, offering the flowers. "I brought these for Ellie, or for you, or both. I honestly wasn't sure." Sarah took them gently and offered a small, reserved smile. "Thank you," she said. "You didn't have to." "I know," he replied, suddenly feeling 12 years old. "But I wanted to." She led him inside. The house was small, cozy, lived in. There were drawings taped to the fridge, a pair of tiny ballet slippers by the door, and a bookshelf crammed with a mix of children's stories and nursing textbooks. The furniture didn't match, but everything was clean and warm. He noted a framed photo of baby Ellie next to a pile of unopened mail and utility bills. This was a home built with effort, not money. Ellie dragged him by the hand into the living room, insisting he sit down and see her newest drawing. As she chatted about school and her favorite snacks, Elias listened, truly listened, for the first time in weeks. Something in her voice, unfiltered and free, soothed something rough inside him. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just wanted to share the things she loved with someone who wanted to hear. Sarah sat across from him, watching silently at first. She was polite, but reserved. Finally, while Ellie ran off to find her sticker book, she finally spoke. "I just want to be clear," she began. "I appreciate what you did for Ellie. Truly, you gave her something she will never forget. But I don't know you, and I have to protect her, always." Elias nodded immediately. "I understand. I would feel exactly the same way. I didn't come here to complicate things. I didn't plan any of this. That day, I just saw a little girl who reminded me of something I lost, and I couldn't keep walking." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Your wife," she said quietly. He looked at her in surprise, then nodded. "Yes, she died 8 months ago. Cancer. We didn't have children. We wanted them, but we ran out of time." There was silence between them. Not awkward, but heavy. Shared loss has a way of leveling people, no matter how different their lives are. Sarah looked down at her hands. "Ellie's father left when she was 3. No note, no goodbye. I thought I was prepared for that possibility, but when it actually happened, I haven't trusted anyone since." Elias leaned forward slightly, not to convince her of anything, but simply to be closer. "You don't have to trust me. Not yet, or never if that's what you decide. I just want to be around if Ellie ever wants to talk or draw or spin in circles until she falls over. She's incredible." Sarah let out the smallest of laughs, unexpected, but real. "She is," she said, "and exhausting." They talked a little more after that. Nothing too deep. Favorite books, what Ellie liked to eat, how Sarah managed the night shifts while raising a child alone. Elias offered no pity, just curiosity. And Sarah, for reasons she couldn't explain, found herself answering honestly. He didn't make her feel small or pitied. He simply made her feel like someone who hadn't been seen in a very long time. When he finally stood to leave, Ellie clung to his arm. "Will you come again?" she asked, her eyes full of hope. Elias crouched down to look her in the eye. "Only if your mommy says it's okay," he said. Sarah didn't answer right away. But as Ellie looked at her with that pleading, unguarded face, she nodded silently. Outside, as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky a soft gold, Elias walked back to his car, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Like maybe the pieces of his broken world were slowly beginning to rearrange themselves into something new, something worth looking forward to. 4. The bond solidifies and Dean's play. 3 months had passed since the dance, and in that time, something unspoken, yet undeniable, had begun to grow between Elias, Sarah, and Ellie. What started as an act of kindness had become a regular part of their lives. Sunday afternoons at the park, movie nights with popcorn spilled all over the sofa. Ellie ran to the door every time the bell rang, hoping it was him. Sarah had started to smile more. Not wide, easy smiles, like she used to give in another life, but soft, quiet ones that crept into the corners of her mouth when she didn't realize it. Elias never overstepped. He never tried to replace anyone. He simply showed up fully and without expectation. And Ellie, who once carried a quiet sadness in her small frame, now walked a little taller. But peace never lasted long in Sarah's world. One afternoon, as she was leaving the hospital, her phone rang with a number she hadn't seen in years. At first, she thought it was a mistake. Then she froze. It was Dean, Ellie's biological father. His voice was casual, almost smug, as if no time had passed. "Hey, Sarah. Been thinking. I want to see my daughter." Sarah nearly dropped the phone. Her mind went red hot with a mixture of rage and fear. He hadn't called in over 3 years. No birthday cards, no child support, not even a text message. Just silence, as if she and Ellie had never existed. She managed to steady her voice enough to say, "You have no right to call her your daughter. You gave that up the day you walked out." But Dean didn't flinch. In fact, he sounded amused. "Heard you've been keeping fancy company. CEO type, right? What's his name?" "Vance. Must be nice. That much money floating around makes me wonder if maybe I should start thinking about my rights again." That's when she understood. He didn't care about Ellie. He cared about control, power, money. Sarah hung up without another word. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to sit on the curb outside the hospital. Her first instinct was to shield Ellie, but her second was pure terror. Dean had always been good at slipping through the cracks, using charm when it suited him, manipulation when it didn't. And if he was truly intending to fight for custody or even visitation, he'd find a way to make their lives a living hell. She called Elias that night, not to panic, not to vent, but because she didn't want to face it alone. He arrived at her door 20 minutes later, still in his blazer, tie loosened, eyes serious. She told him everything. Dean's sudden call, his tone, his words, his threat. She expected Elias to get angry, or try to fix it with money, or connections. But he didn't. He simply sat down next to her on the sofa and said, "No matter what happens, you are not doing this alone. We will fight this together." Ellie was asleep in the next room, unaware of the storm that was about to break. Sarah watched her daughter's chest rise and fall with each peaceful breath and knew she could not let that peace be stolen. But she also knew Dean wouldn't go quietly. 2 weeks later, an official letter arrived in the mail. Dean had filed for shared custody. The wording was cunning, manipulative, alleging he had been denied access, claiming he was looking to mend a long-lost bond. Sarah felt sick just reading it. He didn't even know what Ellie liked to eat, let alone what she dreamed about at night. The legal process began quickly. Meetings, paperwork, court dates. Elias offered his full support, standing by her through it all, bringing coffee to the early morning hearings, sitting silently beside her in the waiting rooms when words weren't enough. The hardest part was explaining it to Ellie. Sarah chose her words carefully, keeping her voice calm, even though her heart was wildly beating. "Sweetie," she began, kneeling next to her daughter. "There's something we need to talk about. Someone from before wants to see you. Someone who used to be here when you were very little." Ellie frowned, clearly confused. "Who?" "Your biological father," Sarah said gently. "His name is Dean. He's asking the court if he can be part of your life again." Ellie was silent for a long time, her small face unreadable. Then she whispered, "Do I have to?" Sarah hugged her tight. "We are going to do everything we can so you don't have to do anything you're not ready for. You are not alone in this." That night, when Sarah tucked her in, Ellie clutched her hand and asked, "Will Elias still be my daddy if this other man comes back?" Sarah's throat closed up. She hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead, afraid of what she couldn't promise. But she said the only thing she knew to be true. "Elias loves you. That doesn't change no matter what." Interaction. If you were Sarah, what legal strategy would you have used to protect your daughter from an absentee father returning for money? Comment your plan now. 5. Ellie's choice and Dean's final surrender. The days that followed were filled with legal tension and emotional exhaustion. Dean was smug in the courtroom, dressing like a reformed man, telling stories about regret and redemption. But he underestimated one thing: Ellie. When the judge requested a private session with the child to hear her feelings, Ellie walked into that room with all her mother's quiet strength and the steady firmness Elias had helped her find. Later, Sarah and Elias would hear what Ellie had said from the court-appointed child psychologist. She had spoken softly, but clearly. "My real daddy is the one who danced with me when I was sad. He didn't walk away. He showed up. That's the kind of daddy I want." Sarah wept when she heard that. Not just for the words, but because they came from a little girl who had every reason to feel abandoned by the world, yet had somehow found the courage to choose love. The petition for custody was denied. Dean had no legal rights or standing, and the court made it clear that forcing a relationship on a child who didn't want it was not in her best interest. When they returned home that night, exhausted but victorious, Ellie ran straight into Elias's arms and whispered, "You're still my dance daddy, right?" He scooped her up without hesitation. "Always," he said. And for the first time in what felt like years, Sarah allowed herself to believe that maybe the worst was finally behind them. The weeks following the court decision were a strange blend of exhaustion and quiet relief. Sarah felt as if she'd been holding her breath for years and had finally let it out. But even now, with the judge's ruling behind them and Dean Idelius out of the picture, a part of her couldn't stop bracing for another blow. Trauma teaches you to expect the good times to be only borrowed time. Yet, there was something undeniably different now. The shadow that had loomed over their little family for so long had begun to recede. Ellie was sleeping better. She no longer woke up crying from dreams she didn't understand. She no longer asked if someone else would try to come and take her away. Instead, she bounded out of bed every morning with her usual energy, braiding her doll's hair and asking when Elias would be back. The bond between them had only strengthened. He was the one she came to with her drawings, the one she asked to push her higher on the swings, the one who would sit with her as she tried to sound out big words, cheering every small success like it was a championship victory. Sarah found herself noticing the way Elias had become a fixture in their lives. Not loudly, not suddenly, but slowly, through constant presence. He was there for Sunday dinners, helping carry in the groceries, sitting up late with Sarah after Ellie was asleep. They talked about everything: childhoods, loss, dreams they hadn't admitted out loud for years. There was no need to impress each other. The masks they both wore in their separate polished worlds had silently slipped off. One afternoon, Sarah found herself standing by the kitchen sink, looking out into the backyard, where Elias and Ellie were constructing a crooked little birdhouse. She watched as he held the tiny pieces of wood together and let Ellie hammer the nails, even when she bent two of them completely sideways. He didn't correct her or sigh in frustration. He just smiled, adjusted the pieces, and tried again. That image, Elias, patient and present, covered in wood glue and laughter, revived something in her chest she had buried for years. Not just affection, not just gratitude, love. Not the cautious, maybe someday love she thought she might find again, but something truer, solid, earned. She was still watching when he came inside, his arms full of paintbrushes and wood shavings. Ellie skipped in behind him. He grinned, his hair ruffled, a smudge of blue paint on his jaw. "We have created a masterpiece," he said, "and possibly violated several building codes." Ellie held the birdhouse up like a trophy, beaming. Sarah laughed, then stopped, her voice quieter than expected. "Thank you for all this." For her. Elias shrugged slightly, as if it were nothing. You don't have to thank me. Yes, I do, Sarah said, her eyes meeting his. Because you chose us when you didn't have to. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at her. Really looked past the tired eyes and the worn sweatshirt, past the months of fear and caution, and saw the woman who had fought every day to keep their life together. I did, he finally said, and I'd choose you again. Call to action. Do you believe constant presence and unconditional love are more valuable than a blood tie? Like this video and comment your opinion. The next morning, something unexpected arrived. A letter delivered in a plain envelope addressed to Sarah in handwriting she hadn't seen in years. At first, her stomach twisted. Was Dean trying again? Had he found another loophole? When she opened it, however, she froze. The letter was from a state prison 2 states away. The handwriting was undeniably his, but the tone was different. Stripped of ego, raw. Dean had been arrested a few weeks after the custody hearing on charges unrelated to Sarah: financial fraud, assault, parole violation. The letter was an apology, albeit a broken and clumsy one. He admitted abandoning them, choosing himself over his family, and only returning when he thought there might be something in it for him. You were always better than me, he wrote. And Ellie is lucky she got that from you. I thought I would come back to claim something that wasn't mine anymore, but now I see I never earned it. She isn't mine. I am not hers. Please don't let her grow up hating me. Just let her forget me, and let her love who is loving her now. Attached was an officially notarized statement of full parental relinquishment. It was brief and legally binding. He had signed away any future claim, right or presence in Ellie's life. No appeals, no challenges, just an end. Sarah sat at the kitchen table for a long time, the letter in her lap, the sun rising behind her like a silent promise. When Elias arrived later that morning, Ellie launched herself into his arms as always. But this time, Sarah didn't just watch. She walked over to them, silently slipped the letter into Elias's hands, and rested her head on his shoulder. Looks like we aren't borrowing time anymore, she said softly. He looked at her, then down at Ellie, who was cheerfully humming to herself and talking about pancakes. No, he said. We're building it. 6. A forever. Written with courage. Summer crept in slowly that year, spreading over San Francisco like a long exhale after a season of holding one's breath. The light pouring through the windows of Sarah's small house felt warmer, more forgiving. After all the court battles, the fear, the long night, life had finally settled into something that felt like peace. Ellie had blossomed. She started calling Elias Daddy without anyone prompting her. One day, it just slipped out mid-sentence, as casually as if she'd been saying it all her life. Elias had looked at Sarah when it happened, startled, moved, but said nothing in the moment. Later that night, he had admitted it was the most important word anyone had ever spoken to him. One evening, after Ellie was asleep, Sarah and Elias sat on the porch, sipping tea and watching the stars come out. The air smelled like grass and warm pavement. Sarah looked at him, her voice quiet. But sure. I think we're ready, she said. Elias turned to her, his eyebrows raised. For what? He asked. She smiled. To stop holding back, to stop waiting for something to break. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he took her hand, raised it gently, and kissed her forehead. I've been ready, he whispered. And for once, Sarah believed it all. The peace, the love, the life they were finally allowed to build. Not borrowed, not fragile, but theirs. Full, complete, and unafraid. The invitation arrived in a thick, cream-colored envelope with gold foil edges, tucked into the usual pile of mail, filled with grocery store ads and utility bills. It was from the Aurora Children's Foundation, one of the region's largest children's charities, inviting Mr. Elias Vance and his guests to attend their annual gala. When he arrived later that night, she handed him the envelope with a teasing smile. "The fancy people still want you, apparently." Elias raised an eyebrow and glanced at the invitation. "Ah, this. I forgot it was coming up. I usually just send a check and skip the social part." Ellie, sitting at the kitchen table drawing, suddenly looked up. "Can I go?" Elias crouched down by Ellie's chair, inspecting her artwork as if it were a masterpiece. "I'll tell you what," he said. "It might not be a kid party, but maybe we could make an exception this year. How about you come as my date?" Ellie's face lit up like a sunrise. "Really?" Elias smiled. "Only if your mommy comes too." And that is how Sarah found herself a week later, standing in front of her bedroom mirror in a deep navy blue gown she never thought she'd wear again. Ellie wore a pale gold dress with a tulle skirt that shimmered in the light. Elias arrived at their door in a tailored black tuxedo, holding a small nosegay of white flowers for Ellie and a single gardenia for Sarah. The ballroom was breathtaking. Sarah felt out of place for 10 seconds until Elias slipped his hand into hers and leaned down to whisper, "Everyone's looking at you. You are the most beautiful thing in this room." They danced slowly at first, then took turns spinning Ellie around the dance floor, her laughter louder than the music. This wasn't a performance. It was real. As the night wore on, the charity auction began. Elias stood up and asked for the microphone. The room quieted. Sarah looked up in surprise. He hadn't mentioned a speech. He stood at the front, tall and calm, holding Ellie's small hand in his. "Most of you know me as a businessman," he began. "But tonight, I want to talk about a moment that changed everything for me." He paused, looking down at Ellie with a soft smile. "Not long ago, I drove past a dance studio and saw a little girl sitting alone on the steps. She said she didn't have a father to dance with, and I asked if I could be hers just for that one moment. I didn't realize that saying yes to that one dance would mean saying yes to everything that followed." Sarah's eyes filled as she listened, her heart pounding in her chest. Elias continued, "Sometimes, the people who need us the most aren't looking for grand promises. Sometimes, they just need us to show up." He announced that he would match every donation made that night, but Elias did not step off the stage right away. He looked at Sarah, his voice dropping slightly. "And speaking of imagining more, Sarah, would you come up here for a moment?" The spotlight shifted. She stood, her heart hammering, as she walked towards him. When she reached him, Elias turned to face her, reached into his jacket pocket, and pulled out a small velvet box. "I didn't plan for this to happen here," he said low enough for only her to hear. "But I realized I don't want to wait anymore. I want this life with you. With her forever." He opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring. "Will you marry me?" he asked. "Not because we need a title, but because I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my life. And I want Ellie to never again have to wonder who her father is." Sarah's hands were trembling. The answer came so easy, so sure, she couldn't believe she had ever lived without it. "Yes," she whispered. The room erupted in cheers. Ellie squealed and hugged them both tight. And as the music started again, and Elias gently twirled Sarah into a slow dance, they knew that what had started as a single act of compassion had become something unbreakable. Not a rescue, not a fantasy, a family, real, imperfect, luminous, and finally, complete. Final call to action. Share this incredible love story with someone who needs a reminder that true family is chosen. Subscribe for more stories and comment on what moment made you tear up.